All right, you sick fucks, strap yourselves in, because this deep dive is for adults only.
For sure.
This is going to be one hell of a trip.
Yeah.
We're diving deep into the life and times of Syd Barrett.
That's right.
The mastermind.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Behind Pink Floyd's early psychedelic sound.
Absolutely.
Think acid trips, insane gigs in music that'll melt your goddamn brain.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from a biography.
Oh, nice.
Packed with first-hand accounts and wild stories. Basically a time machine back to the batshit crazy 60s.
It's wild how Syd's story is basically the story of psychedelia itself.
Yeah.
From those smoky underground clubs to, you know, the whole thing blowing up in the mainstream.
Fuck yeah, and we're going to figure out what made this motherfucker tick.
Right.
We'll dig into the insane Cambridge scene that birthed Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
And trace how this whole psychedelic thing went from a bunch of weirdos tripping balls to like a full-blown cultural phenomenon. This shit's going to be wild.
It all starts in Cambridge, right?
Right, Cambridge.
Not exactly the first place you think of for a psychedelic revolution.
All those ancient buildings and stuffy academics. But under the surface,
Yeah.
there was this whole other scene brewing this weird mix of tradition and rebellion.
Totally.
Picture cobblestone streets, the river cam snaking through it all.
Right.
And then, boom, you stumble upon a place called the Nine Wells.
Okay.
This natural spring was shrouded in all sorts of spooky folklore linked to witchcraft and goddamn druids.
Interesting. Right.
Yeah.
It's like this foreshadowing of the strangeness that becomes Syd's signature. This dude was drawn to the mystical and unconventional shit even as a kid.
Makes you wonder if those childhood stories about witches and magic planted some fucked up seed in his brain, right?
Maybe, but let's not forget the books, man.
Yeah.
Syd was obsessed with authors like Kenneth Grahame, Edward Lear,
Oh, yeah.
and Lewis Carroll. You know those twisted fairy tales, the nonsensical poems? It's all there in Syd's lyrics.
Wow.
That playful, surreal, sometimes dark as fuck humor.
Yeah, he was fucking with people's minds way back then.
Totally. And then, bam, rock and roll hits England like a goddamn bomb. Elvis, Chuck Berry, Bill Haley.
Oh, yeah.
These guys were like a giant fuck you to the stuffy post-war world.
Total generational clash.
Oh, yeah.
Parents hated this new music, thought it was the devil's work, but for kids like Syd,
Right.
it was pure fucking liberation.
Think about it. England in the 50s was still recovering from the war, right?
Yeah.
Everyone was supposed to follow the rules, keep their heads down, and then you've got this music that's all about energy rebellion, breaking free. No wonder the kids went apeshit.
And Syd was right there in the thick of it. He was one of the Teds. These rock and roll rebels with their leather jackets, slick back hair, and this whole fuck you attitude. They were the original punks, man.
It's important to understand this context because it shaped Syd's whole worldview.
Yeah.
He saw how music could be a weapon, a way to challenge the bullshit status quo.
So he ends up in Cambridge, surrounded by this crew of artists, poets, and musicians.
Right.
They called themselves the Cambridge Set.
The Cambridge Set. I like that.
They were like a breeding ground for crazy ideas, hanging out at pubs, like the Criterion, smoking tons of weed and just soaking up this bohemian vibe.
Some of the key players in this group were John Gordon, Stephen Pyle, and Storm Thorgerson, who ended up designing all those iconic Pink Floyd album covers.
Oh, wow.
They were heavily into the Beat Generation, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, you know, those American writers who were all about rejecting conformity and exploring the edges of consciousness.
Yeah, they were searching for some higher truth, man. And for Syd, music became his way of expressing that search.
And his musical tastes were all over the fucking place, which is really important. He loved American blues legends like Leadbelly, Bo Diddley,
Oh, yeah.
and Memphis Minnie, but he also dug folk music, jazz, even classical shit.
Yeah, Syd wasn't just a one-trick pony. He devoured it all and then twisted it into something totally new.
Exactly. He was a synthesizer, taking those blues riffs, turning them on their head, adding layers of psychedelia, and weaving in those literary influences we talked about. The motherfucker was already playing in bands before Pink Floyd. One of them was called Jeff Mott, and the mottos, they'd hang out in music shops playing guitars until they got kicked out.
Syd was like a magpie, man, always snatching up new sounds and ideas.
Little magpie.
And then he discovers Bo Diddley, Game Changer.
Fucking right. That driving rhythm, that distorted guitar, it was like a sonic punch in the face. Bo Diddley was raw, rebellious, and hypnotic, and it all seeped into Syd's musical DNA.
I can hear it.
You can hear echoes of that sound in Pink Floyd's early stuff.
For sure, for
like
sure.
that proto-punk energy.
And Syd starts to find his own voice, his own style. He's writing poems, drawing, experimenting with his guitar.
Yeah.
It's all coming together.
It's all coming together.
And then he decides to ditch Cambridge and head to London for art school.
Art school.
Camberwell Art School, to be exact.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's when shit really starts to get interesting.
London in the mid-60s was a hotbed for creativity and counterculture. The perfect place for a guy like Syd to thrive.
And guess what? He ends up sharing a flat at 101 Cromwell Road with none other than Roger Waters. This place became legendary in the underground scene, a psychedelic Grand Central Station for all sorts of crazy motherfuckers.
It was a revolving door of artists, musicians, and colorful characters. People like Mike Leonard, Nigel Lismore, Gordon, Jenny Spires, they were all part of this tight-knit community that was pushing the boundaries of art music and consciousness. They were all experimenting with drugs, sharing ideas, and creating some of the most groundbreaking music of the decade. The psychedelic revolution was brewing, and Syd was right at the fucking center of it.
And that's when LSD enters the picture and things get really fucking weird.
We're not just talking about getting high here.
No.
Back then, LSD was seen as a tool for expanding consciousness, for breaking down the barriers of perception.
Yeah, those motherfuckers thought acid was going to unlock some higher truth.
People like Michael Hollingshead and Timothy Leary were advocating for it as a way to explore the hidden depths of the mind.
Wow.
It was a time of intense experimentation.
Yeah.
They believed psychedelics could unlock new levels of creativity and understanding.
And Syd was all in. He was already writing those trippy, surreal songs, but LSD took his shit to a whole other level.
There's no separating Syd's music from the influence of LSD. It's infused in everything, the lyrics, the instrumentation. And it gave Pink Floyd that signature psychedelic sound.
And it fueled those legendary Pink Floyd rehearsals in Mike Leonard's flat, where they jam for hours experimenting with sound lights and all kinds of mind-blowing shit.
These weren't just practice sessions. They were sonic explorations, journeys into the unknown.
They were creating something totally new, something that had never been heard before. They were playing gigs at small places like Hornsey College, but word was getting out. People were starting to freak out over their sound.
And then came the UFO Club. This place was fucking legendary, the epicenter of London's psychedelic scene.
Man, the UFO Club, all the coolest bands, the freakiest artists, the most mind-bending light shows.
Oh, yeah?
It was all going down there. Imagine a dark, smoky basement, packed with people tripping balls.
Right.
Lost in the swirling vortex of music and lights. Pure sensory overload, man.
The atmosphere was electric, and Pink Floyd were the house band, playing these marathon sets, just improvising and letting the music take them wherever the fuck it wanted to go.
They were evolving fast, moving away from those blues covers and getting deeper into their own material. And the UFO was the perfect place to push boundaries. They were jamming with other experimental artists like AMM and Keith Rowe.
Yeah.
Who were doing some seriously far-out shit with noise and improvisation.
It was this crazy melting pot of genres and art forms, jazz rock, electronic music, performance art, all smashed together into this psychedelic explosion. And Syd was right in the middle of it, soaking it all up and spitting it back out in his own unique way.
And this is where they catch the eye of Peter Jenner, who becomes their first manager.
Okay.
He saw the potential in these psychedelic weirdos and helped them navigate the music industry, eventually landing them a deal with EMI.
Wow, EMI.
EMI, man, the biggest fucking label in the UK.
It was a sign of the times psychedelia was seeping into the mainstream, and those record execs were smelling the money they were willing to take a chance on, those freaks from the UFO Club.
And then came the album that changed everything, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Darius.
This was Syd's masterpiece, man. A groundbreaking record that bottled the whole psychedelic experience. They recorded it at Abbey Road Studios.
Oh, wow.
With the legendary Beatles producer Norman Smith at the helm.
Talk about pressure. These young acid-fueled guys are recording in the same studio where the Beatles made history, but they didn't let it faze them. They went in there and created one of the most innovative and influential rock albums of all time.
Astronomy Domini. That song just explodes out of the speakers.
Yes.
With those swirling organs, spacey sound effects.
Right.
And Syd's lyrics about planets and interstellar travel.
Pure psychedelic bliss. It's like Syd's taking you on a trip through the cosmos, man. You can feel his fascination with science fiction and cosmology in every note.
And then there's Interstellar Overdrive, which is basically a 10-minute acid jam.
It's a trip.
It starts with this simple riff, but then it just takes off building and building with layers of feedback, distortion, and echo. It's like a sonic representation of a psychedelic trip.
Chaotic and unpredictable, but also incredibly beautiful and mesmerizing. That's what made The Piper at the Gates of Dawn so special. It captured the whole spectrum of the psychedelic experience, from the blissful highs to the darker, more terrifying side.
You can't forget See Emily Play, which was their first big hit single.
Yeah.
It's still psychedelic, but it's got that pop sensibility that brought Pink Floyd to a wider audience.
That song was a turning point for Syd. The pressure of fame started to get to him, and he wasn't comfortable with the commercialization of their music. The cracks were starting to show.
The dude was struggling to cope with being a rock star, the constant touring, the interviews, the pressure to write more hits. It was all taking its toll, and his drug use was getting out of control, more and more acid, and his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic.
There are stories about Syd just standing on stage, staring into space, not playing a note. It's like he was losing touch with reality. The acid was starting to fuck with his head.
It's a fucked up story.
Yeah.
But it shows how fragile the human mind can be. Even for a brilliant artist like Syd, he couldn't handle the pressure that came with his success, and it all came crashing down during their first American tour.
Oh, no.
Syd was a total mess. Meltdowns on stage, clashing with the band, basically falling apart.
There's that infamous story about a gig at the Cheetah Club in L.A., where Syd just stood there for the whole set, not playing his guitar. The guy was gone, man lost in his own world.
After that tour, they knew Syd couldn't continue with Pink Floyd. He was too fucked up. They brought in David Gilmour,
Oh, wow.
an old friend from Cambridge, to play guitar.
At first, they wanted to keep Syd involved in the songwriting and maybe have him make guest appearances, but it became clear that wasn't going to work. He was just too unpredictable.
He was showing up to rehearsals with these bizarre, unplayable songs like that one, where he just kept repeating, "Have you got it yet?" Over and over. It was clear his mental state was deteriorating. He was losing his grip on reality.
They had to let him go. Tough decision, but there was no other way. It was the end of an era. Syd Barrett, the visionary, the madman, the genius behind Pink Floyd's psychedelic sound, he was gone. The band would never be the same.
His music lived on, though. Those early Pink Floyd albums became classics, inspiring countless musicians and shaping the future of rock.
And even though Syd's solo career was short and chaotic, those two albums, The Madcap Laughs and Barrett, are still fascinating and powerful. You can hear the brilliance shining through even as he's unraveling.
They're a tough listen.
Yeah.
But there's something so raw and honest about them. You can hear the pain, the confusion, the desperation in his voice.
It's like listening to a brilliant mind slowly disintegrating, a reminder of the human cost of creativity. Sometimes the price of brilliance is just too high.
So Syd leaves Pink Floyd and tries to go solo. What a fucking train wreck.
Yeah, those recording sessions were legendary for being chaotic and unpredictable.
He was working with great musicians, David Gilmour, members of Sock Machine.
Right.
But Syd was in a bad place. Mentally, the pressure of recording just made things worse.
For sure.
There were stories about him spacing out, losing track of what they were doing, and having to start over from scratch. It was like he was a ghost haunting his own music.
Those solo albums are like audio documents of a mind coming undone, moments of brilliance, but fleeting.
And the songs themselves are all over the map.
Oh, yeah.
Some were beautiful and haunting, like Terrapin and Late Night.
Beautiful songs.
Others were just weird and unsettling, like Vegetable Man and Bob Dylan Blues.
It's fascinating listening to them now, knowing what we know about his mental state. They really are like glimpses into a mind falling apart.
Syd releases those two solo albums and then poof, disappears from the music scene completely.
He retreated back to Cambridge to his mother's house and basically became a recluse. No more music, no performing, no interviews. He just faded away.
What a shame, man. A tragic ending for such a bright talent. There were occasional sightings of him, and rumors would swirl about his mental state. Some said he was schizophrenic, others blamed the LSD.
Whatever it was clear Syd would never be the same again. It almost adds to the mystique, though, right? He became this cult figure, a symbol of both lost innocence and the dark side of psychedelia.
Like the Jimi Hendrix of psychedelia, burned bright and fast, then vanished.
Exactly. But Syd's legacy lived on. Pink Floyd became one of the biggest bands in the world, but they never forgot about him.
They even paid tribute to him in their music, especially with Shine On You, Crazy Diamond. That's a beautiful and haunting song, man.
It's like their apology to Syd, acknowledging his brilliance and the tragedy of his downfall.
But Syd didn't give a shit about any of that. He'd moved on, rejected that whole world of fame and music.
Nope. He'd moved on, wanted nothing to do with it.
It's like that story about him showing up at Abbey Road one last time while they were recording Shine On. He just walks in, watches them for a bit, and then walks out without a word.
haunting man like a ghost revisiting his past.
But hold on, there's more to this story. After those 2 solo albums, Syd actually tried to make a comeback.
Yeah, in the early 70s, he formed a band called Stars with some local musicians in Cambridge, played a few gigs, and there are bootlegs floating around.
But it was short-lived. Syd wasn't up for it anymore.
His mental health was still shaky, and he just didn't want to be a rock star anymore. He'd had his fill of the spotlight.
He just wanted to be left the fuck alone.
And for the most part, he got his wish, lived a quiet life in Cambridge, painting, gardening, keeping to himself.
But the past never really let go, did it?
The shadow of Syd Barrett, the psychedelic icon, the fallen angel, it loomed large. Even in his quiet life, he couldn't escape the legacy of his music. People still sought him out, wanting a glimpse of the guy who created those mind-blowing sounds. They wanted to know what happened, where he went, what secrets he held.
But Syd wasn't interested in telling his story. He'd moved on and wanted everyone else to do the same.
Some stories just refuse to be forgotten, though, and Syd Barrett's is one of them. It's a story about brilliance and madness, about the power and the danger of creativity, about the fleeting nature of fame and the music that lives on.
It makes you think, man, what might have been if Syd could have handled the pressure, if he hadn't gone off the rails?
Maybe that's part of what makes his story so captivating, the tragedy, the mystery, the unanswered questions. It all feeds the legend of Syd Barrett.
So even though he's gone, he's still here with us. In a way, his music lives on, and his story keeps inspiring and intriguing us.
He was a shooting star burning bright and fast before disappearing into the night, but the light from that star, man, it still shines on.
Damn right it does. What a wild fucking ride.
Yeah.
The life and times of Syd Barrett, a trip through the psychedelic 60s, the rise and fall of a rock star, and the enduring power of a brilliant, troubled mind.
So what do you think, listeners? What does Syd's story tell us about creativity and the price of artistic expression? And what the fuck do you think happened to him after he walked away from it all? Keep digging, keep listening, and keep the spirit of Syd alive. Peace out.